Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of Fake Accents Unite. I'm joined, as always, by a very tired-looking Britisher. Good evening, sir.
Good evening. How are we doing?
Oh, not too bad, not too bad. Just want to double-check from people that they can hear what we're saying.
Which is always worth doing.
Which is always worth
I can
doing.
attest from my channel, yes.
Given that my streaming software is unclear as to whether or not we're actually running at the moment. There we go. Seems to be up and running. Yeah, let's do this.
Made its mind up, has it?
It's made its mind up. Eventually, we've got there now.
First off, I would just like to take this opportunity to quell a rumor that is a vicious rumor going round on Twitter, namely that I was supposedly heard rapping on a live stream. This is completely and utterly untrue, and I wish to distance myself from any such statements whatsoever.
I would have to say that any claims that the Britisher makes are not the views of the Fake Accents Unite Corporation. Yes, any views that he expresses are his own only.
Particular person known as academic agent is spreading such rumors, and yes,
it's on your channel. It's on your channel on the video that you have. Like it's not. It's not like someone's exposed you. You've exposed yourself. And no one clipped that either.
This is all in. This is in. Yes, indeed. This is entirely rumor and innuendo. None of this is true.
The real question is, when is your mixtape going to drop? Are you going to get, the Britisher ensemble? Perhaps you'll do
published by Sony Records.
Yeah. Perhaps you'll have your own, you'll do your own backing vocals as well. So it'd be like, I'm the big daddy, and then in the background, a little Britisher voice will go, "He's the big daddy," That sort of...
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, you're selling this to me. Yes.
Oh, clearly.
Of course, with lots of twerking ladies, as of course is the norm in rap songs.
I still maintain you need to release that as a standalone video, if only unlisted, for the enjoyment of the people. Bread and circuses, British Air, we need them. Yes. So let's go and trying to tell us we are 86,777 seconds late. So thank you very much, Cisco. Always appreciated there. Of course, you could do a limited time release. I mean, the chat suggests you could do it on an 8-track.
As I say, this is all complete nonsense. This never happened. These are wild aspersions that some people are spreading about me.
In the same vein of things which need to be released to the general public as soon as physically possible.
I mean, I will sooner rap as Greta Thunberg will be made Person of the Year.
Oh God, we have to talk about that later in the evening. Goodness me, but your story from last night, your short story. I've been, the clamoring in the comments of people who want you to record said short story and release it properly on your channel. Is there? Are we expecting something like that in the near future?
Oh dear God! I mean, if I were to kind of properly record this, I mean, the amount of editing that would be necessary for something like that, I dread to think.
I mean, you did
2 pages.
You did pretty well last night. Not too much stutter. Oh, there we go.
Well, yeah, but I know that particularly when I do live streams, I always sound a lot different because largely I'm kind of at an angle to my microphone and somewhat laid back. Whereas if I do, if I do a sort of proper video, then I'm kind of very much sort of, in the right angle for the microphone. This is the BBC calling, if you know what I mean. It's a much different affair. But then it takes a great deal of editing because I always fumble and stumble and whatever. So I dread the idea of having to do all that text again. But who knows?
No,
particularly also, I mean, it's definitely a Kishon, isn't it? So, I mean, I was, I thought I would be excused given that it's an English translation, but yeah.
Someone in chat says, "What do you make of Daisy Ridley's comments, re Trump and Bojo?" Well, aside from the fact that I don't put much stock in what Daisy Ridley has to say.
Okay, just in order to placate the old man here, who and what is Daisy Ridley?
She's the actress who plays the main protagonist of the current new Star Wars saga.
Are you serious?
Yes. She plays Rey. So, Mayor Rey Sue, as we call her. I have a background hum, apparently, so I will mess with the noise gate and hopefully that
So
won't be too bad.
I can't hear a hum coming from you. So
No, it appears to be something exclusive to OBS.
YouTube.
For God's sake, for whatever reason.
So no, I think we are not presently in a time in which celebrity endorsement or comment is either wanted or has any effect. Back in the days of Tony Blair, it did seem to sort of carry quite a bit of weight. But I think generally you need celebrities. You need a different class of celebrity, and I know that sounds strange. But yeah, I really don't think what anybody who plays a part, be it a minor part or otherwise, in Star Wars has to say about present day politics will carry any weight with anybody.
Yeah, no, I tend to agree. Although, I say that it carries weight with the people who are always going to vote one way. That makes sense. I think most people made up their mind. I don't think of this.
Well, yeah, but what I mean with celebrities can carry a certain amount of weight is if they are representative of a certain demographic or a certain lifestyle, or if they, in that regard, they represent something, and people listen up when they speak, if you know what I mean. What's the Star Wars demographic?
Kids.
Do you understand what I mean? That's where you look at it and you just go, who do these people speak for? This is the equivalent of, and I'm not saying this in order to dismiss. I'm saying this as an honest comparison. This is the equivalent of the Spice Girls speaking out on British politics.
Right.
Nobody would attribute it any importance. I mean, in this case, if you take someone like Stephen Fry, everybody knows he's a dyed in the wool Labour supporter. But someone like him with his sort of media persona, if it were unknown what he thinks, and then he would come and give some sort of opinion, something like that might be something that people would listen to, given his given his profile, the way people perceive him. But as such, yes, somebody who plays somebody in Star Wars, no, not a chance.
Yeah, I don't think any of the younger actors and actresses have any particular weight to them, and I don't think we have a particular menagerie of storied actors who have any particular weight to what they're saying. In fact, most of the older generation. I mean, I think people mentioned in the comments here that who was it? Anthony Hopkins basically said, actors shouldn't make political statements, right? So
that's actually quite helpful.
Yeah, and I think that's generally, unless you're I've noticed a drop off, especially after 2016. Interestingly, of particularly the Americans cooling things off. Although we've yet to see in 2020 when Trump comes up for re-election, we might see a resurgence. But after the backlash that was given last time, when Robert De Niro, and Arnold Schwarzenegger, and a whole load of other actors and actresses basically did a whole don't let Trump win campaign, which naturally backfired on them. And they phrased the whole thing as saving the country. I feel like it's made people more cautious about who they back. Although
Yeah, I think generally when it comes to, don't let Trump win, that works if you have just some middle of the road candidate who is the alternative. The problem in that case was the alternative to Trump was Hillary Clinton.
yes, I can see
And
that.
I still say that. So, in a way, not even those people would necessarily want to put their name to be vote Hillary, pro Hillary, if you know what I mean. No, they were
Yes,
just
Hill
anti-Trump.
dog till I die.
Yeah, and you look at this and yeah, I think the population was just basically looking at it and say which is the lesser of these two evils. And in that regard, no amount of celebrity endorsement will sway things.
Yeah.
Albeit that, you will be surprised sometimes how people respond to celebrity. So when the 9/11 attacks happened, there was a celebrity video. So there were celebrities that came out and were basically, in one way, talking to the nation, and in the other way, talking to Al Qaeda, as in, you'll never beat us. And I found it actually a bit corny. I thought, really? But the public reception of it, particularly by Americans, it appeared, was overwhelmingly positive.
I think a lot of people have lost a faith in what you might consider the traditional celebrity voice.
Yeah.
As opposed to, you look at the traction someone like Greta Thunberg has at the moment, and she is the new political celebrity who's not a politician and not a scientist.
And isn't really a celebrity, yes.
I mean, I don't think you can claim she isn't a celebrity with the amount of stuff behind her.
The reason I say she isn't a celebrity is because it's all manufactured. It's entirely fake. I think
that doesn't conflict with my definition of celebrity, I'm afraid.
Oh, it does with mine. I think that even someone like what was she called? Katie Price, the Jordan.
Oh God, yeah.
Who is a kind of
the British Paris Hilton.
Quintessential definition of someone who's famous for being famous. There's nothing really to her, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
There was still the skill there of making oneself the constant center of attention. So these people are not completely without merit. They know how to play the game, and that's how they get to be there, if you know what I mean. Whereas with Greta Thunberg, I believe from A to B, nothing is her. I think she is pretty much a random person that one decided upon and said, okay, fine, we'll make her famous.
She has the fervour, but nothing else.
Yes, but you can be quite sure, for example, that the words will be placed in her mouth.
Oh yeah, no, she doesn't have the competence.
A 15-year-old, because I believe this was before she was 16, doesn't address the Davos conference, doesn't get to meet the Pope, doesn't speak in the European Parliament, doesn't have the European heads of government listen to her, doesn't get to speak to the president of the European Commission. These things do not happen.
Don't forget cream tea with Michael Gove.
Oh, well, I mean, I thought I would save the highlight for last, and now you've spoiled it all. But it's that sort of thing. You look at it and just go, this is all entirely false. This is entirely a lie. Nothing about this is true. And it's that more than anything else irks me.
So I was noting because before this Time magazine thing came out. For those of you who don't know, she is Time magazine's Person of the Year. I was walking past my local Wetherspoons, Waterstones, which is a bookshop, one of the large bookshops in the UK, and they named that their author of the year was Greta Thunberg. And I'm going, does she have time to write a book? Has she now? It's
more than likely while she was on her yacht.
It's a small volume called "No One Is Too Small to Make a Difference."
Well, let's go back to Katie Price, shall we? So, I mean, for those who don't know, Katie Price, effectively a page 3 girl made good, if you know what I mean. She became famous beyond that. And yes, how many books did she publish? She must have published about 3 or 4 books. And, I mean, do we really believe she wrote any of them? There is a ghost writer market, effectively, where if you are a writer, you can effectively be a gun for hire for people who wish to have a autobiography published.
Not to mention both of her parents are activists in their own right as well. Yes.
Yeah, so you would look at the Greta Thunberg phenomenon and you wouldn't really be overly surprised that one had hired a ghostwriter. I mean,
no, but the thing that I wanted to note with the with this author of the year thing was that there was this great big stack of yellow books, little yellow Greta Thunberg books, which no one was interested in the bookshop, as they were sitting there with this sort of thing. It's quite popular.
I would not all be surprised if it turns out that several think tanks have bought several thousand copies each in order to hoist her onto the bestseller list.
Oh, I was tempted to pick up a copy myself just to see how bad the drivel is, but I have decided against it. But basically, she had the gall, I would say, to speak at the UN Climate Change Summit and say that world leaders should stop using creative PR to avoid real action. Which is funny, given that almost her entire activist career is creative PR.
Creative PR, yes. Well put, very well put. But then again, I mean, we must, after all, admit that she is now among the great orators of the world. She will always be remembered. Julius Caesar, I came, I saw, I conquered. Churchill, we shall fight them on the beaches. Mark Antony via William Shakespeare, friends, Romans, countrymen, and of course, Greta Thunberg.
How dare you?
So,
but
yes.
the interesting thing as well, she appears to be losing clout with the politicians who are obviously very interested in speaking to her for most of last year. But she went to this conference and she was considered to be one of the big speakers there. But apparently hardly anyone turned up to her speech.
Mm-hmm.
So, her now famous speech, apparently she was a lot more measured this time around, but it's not gained any traction. It's not being shared virally.
She was much more measured, or her speechwriters were much more measured.
You're getting the inference there anyway, Richard.
Yeah.
But so, it's a little less dramatic than you have stolen my dreams and my childhood with your empty words. We'll be watching you.
Well, I think there is a separate subject that marries quite nicely into this one. Have you heard that Mr. Bellamy has died?
I have, yes, the naturalist.
Yes. Have you been aware of the fact that over recent years he was never really on television?
Yeah, what was it? He criticised climate change model in general, didn't he?
He described it as poppycock when it was put to him once.
And he claimed it cost him his career.
And funnily enough, no sooner had he said that, he was really never seen again. So here is this kind of cuddly botanist who was on television much more often than you could actually bear. And the moment he actually expressed an opinion that was not canon, immediately it was never heard of again. And yeah, there does seem to be a certain correlation there, doesn't there? In the home of diversity, of course, that is the BBC, which, again, just to prove the point, in the case of Mr. Bellamy, seems to suggest diversity of skin, sexuality, sex, and sexual orientation, but not thought.
I have to just interrupt you here, Britisher. I do agree with what you're saying, but Mr. Gently Benevolent has asked, a rap battle between Britisher and the Big Daddy when?
Would I be cast as giant Britisher stacks, then, would I? Or
what? I mean, whatever you want your moniker to be, Britisher.
Yes, yeah.
And Mighty Balzac saying, "I'm sure Greta helped design the cover for her book, the plain yellow cover."
She chose the marker pen color, and they said, "Okay, fine, we'll make that the front page."
Or highlighter, yeah.
Yeah, highlighter. Sorry, not marker pen.
Yes, I could see Luther Sheffield talking about Bellamy, saying he should have described it as really rather ridiculous.
Yes, there was that. Yes, he had a certain fondness of the letter R, didn't he? Yes.
Grapple me grape nuts. Yes.
It's funny how many of them there were, because there was also Jonathan Wass, wasn't there?
Yes.
Who is very unfortunately named, really, when you think of it.
Yes, the poor man. You think his parents would have known, and in fact, you imagine if he was choosing his stage name and his surname isn't actually Ross.
Well, I mean, maybe they could have gone for Wichard.
Oh my. Waderick, perhaps?
Waterwick, yes.
Or is it that scene in Monty Python?
Rudolph.
For Waterwing? Yes. That reminds me of a sketch in The Thin Blue Line.
This man commands a quack legion, if I remember.
Quack legion. Do you know The Thin Blue Line at all, Britisher?
I am familiar with The Thin Blue Line. Yes, I've got it on DVD somewhere. Yes,
but
I think it's a much underrated series.
And it was quite short, but it's worth it. It's worth its weight in gold. But there's a scene in that where Rowan Atkinson's wife, on set, basically says, she's got very frustrated with Rowan for all of his shenanigans, his busybodiness, and everything. And in front of a subordinate, basically shouts, "And at some point, I'd like a damn good rogering." And Rowan Atkinson has to go into this speech about how they know a man named Roger Ring.
Roger Ring.
Yes.
No, my favourite little scene in that one, it always has to be Inspector Grimm. Inspector Grimm is beautiful in that particular scene.
Oh, yes.
And it's when he does his speech on how he doesn't like culture. And he goes into, opera, just fat women screeching, and ballet. And then he does a halts and says, yes, people staring at posh girls' knickers. That's all ballet. That's all Bleeding Swan Lake is about. And that one just floored me. But yes, make of that what you will, ladies and gentlemen.
We appear to have clashed with the chat, who are not fans of the Thin Blue Line.
I think the Thin Blue Line was, how actors and presenters and whatever, they can become a bit overexposed, and I think that I know Jonathan Ross eventually fell because of the the scandal regarding the phone call and whatever, but as such, I think Jonathan Ross was also very much overexposed on television. He was on too many things, and people then get sick of you, if you know what I mean.
He had his own show. Oh, much like us then, Britisher.
Yes, very much so.
The Jonathan Ross and his fall from grace to basically presenting Penn and Teller's Fool Us.
Yes. But
yes.
I think that both Rowan Atkinson and Ben Elton suffered a bit of overexposure. That there was a bit too much at that particular time. It was one helping too many, and I think that's why they didn't. It didn't necessarily fly too well. But as such, I think that when you look at it, it's competently put together, and it actually isn't. It isn't at all bad. I mean, then again, if you compare anything that has been churned out since the year 2000, it's just a work of art. But sort of measured in 1990s style, yes, it's not Red Dwarf. It's not a classic, but it's a competent, well put together sitcom.
I like to think so. I feel like it was kind of a precursor to something like My Family, which, love it or hate it, was a similar style of
Yeah, I think my family started out very well and then very quickly just deflated to nothing.
I would agree. But now we must move on from comedy, as it is indeed the night before election. So 'twas the night before election. Not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse.
Yes, I'm afraid there's quite a few creatures stirring.
Yes, indeed. Of course, the final poll that I can find has the Tories at a 12-point lead.
So again, we're looking at that 10 to 12% range, aren't we?
Yeah, but
I've always felt that's the range we're actually looking at.
it reckons the Tories will lose a seat, Labour will gain 2, and the Liberal Democrats will lose. That will be that.
I honestly, I don't see that happening at all. Now, I've stuck my neck out on the week that was. I predicted a Tory majority of about 60.
You reckon 60 seats?
Yes. So I know I'm living dangerously, and invariably, when you make a prediction like that, you know that you're going to be found devastatingly wrong. Because I mean, what are the odds of getting it right?
It's interesting to me. I think when it comes to the election, and particularly the advertising, because it was clear at the last general election that Labour held sway through momentum, particularly over basically the sharing of what was effectively viral material, right?
Mm-hmm.
It appears it's less clear this time round, although that's mainly due to the fact that the bodies which are trying to keep track of these things haven't kept up with the fact that most young people, and by young they just mean under 30, have migrated to different social media platforms. Most of them aren't on Facebook anymore.
Yeah.
They've moved across to Instagram, and whilst they will still have snapshots of tweets that come out from politicians, in particular Jeremy Corbyn, that get shared around on Instagram, it's much harder to track, whether the impetus is there.
Yes, but I would also say that the sort of more right-wing organisations have upped their game and have therefore drowned them out a bit.
I don't see it really in terms of the on the ground effects. I see far more canvassing from sort of Labour.
Oh yes, you always will.
Yes,
that's just part of the way. That's just part of the game. Yes, the Labour Party have always had a much more developed ground game. I think the only people who have ever competed with them in that regard are the Lib Dems in certain localities. But yes, the Tory party, I mean, think of it, just consider who makes up the Tory party and who makes up the Labour Party. And then sort of wonder how many, middle-aged people or pensioners will actually be out there on the stump knocking on doors for the Conservative Party. It's not really how the party works.
Not really. But so what I see primarily, like there's been 3 big, let's call it upsets, that the Labour Party has managed to pull off. The first one, the most recent one, is, I guess, the child, the 4-year-old on the hospital floor.
And combined, it was kind of part of the same thing, was then Boris Johnson's muddling when he was interviewed by the ITV reporter about that very thing. So I think that further kind of compounded the whole thing. When he ended up putting the mobile phone of the reporter who was trying to show him the picture in his pocket. So Boris Johnson took the mobile phone and put it in his pocket without looking at it. And clearly he didn't really know in the spur of the moment, how do I react to this? So I think that made a bit of a mess of things. That, of course, came right after my prediction of 60 seats. So, yes, so much to that. But right after that, of course, there was the the Labour Party chap claiming to be talking banter and actually talking to a Tory party activist who then leaked the whole thing.
Yeah. Yes, in fact, we had another.
Perhaps it's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other.
Well, we had who was it? If I can find
Ashworth, wasn't it?
Yeah, Ashworth. But Andy McDonald basically had another interview with Andrew Neil, going, "It really was purely banter."
Yeah,
I think it's clear to anyone who listened to the recording that it's not. However, I don't know how many people, who are not politically engaged, will have actually listened to the original raw recording and not instead listening to the party line at this point. But when it comes to, like, there was misinformation surrounding the child on the floor case. The Labour Party also managed to basically bring. I feel like they came out better from the London Bridge attack than the Tories in the eyes of most of the public. Again, it could just be
I'm
that.
not sold on that, to be honest.
It could just be that I'm in the London bubble, right?
I don't remember the Labour Party making a big impact there. Frankly, I heard more of what Boris Johnson thought of the situation.
Yeah, that's my point. But there was also the comments from Jack Merritt's father saying,
yeah, but
"Don't
I think that
politicise."
backfired. I actually had people get in touch with me saying, "Have you seen what the father has said? How ironic." So, to me, that might not necessarily have been very productive for Labour.
I mean, I don't tend to pay much attention to what the die-hard supporters are saying when it comes to reacting to these sorts of things. I tend to look at the people who are on the fringes or who are not politically engaged.
I know what you mean. The person whom I'm thinking of, who sent me that particular message, there were others, but there was one in particular who actually is a dyed-in-the-wool Labour person who is refusing to vote Labour this time. So that's why I would say that's fairly reflective, because this would be someone whom they should know, whose vote they should know to be in the bag, who is looking at these things and is actually saying, "Oh my God, have you seen what that man just said? How ironic." So to me, this is exactly the audience where it should be counting that is actually saying, "No, this is ridiculous."
Again, it's hard to tell. I think
I know. Yes, this is anecdotal. I know.
Yeah, the NHS, the document that was released, which Labour claimed was the Tories selling us out in terms of the NHS. That, I think, most people, the NHS obviously having a high social value in the country. I feel like that's resonated more. I've seen a lot more, quote, normies getting politically engaged across both my social media, like former colleagues of mine and so on and so forth, people who've never really spoken out before, suddenly going, I don't want this to happen. So that's why I'm going.
I think what they managed to do there, the Labour Party, is not really convince anybody. But what they managed to do is sow the seed of doubt, whereby people began wondering, well, there's no smoke without fire. That's what they managed to do. But if you wave a form in the air, and the one thing that everybody notices about the form is that most of the lines that are actually visible, if not all of them, are blacked out.
Yeah, redaction.
That's when you kind of think, well, what are you trying to prove here? And as such,
you say that that's what it is, but a lot of people will say, "What are you trying to hide?"
Of course, yes, but what I mean is, I don't think one convinced anybody, but I think what they did is place a lot of doubt in people's minds, and in that regard, that's where they were successful. I think when it comes to the successes of Labour, they are largely about dominating the narrative, because if Boris Johnson dominates the narrative with Brexit, let's get Brexit done. I've got an oven-ready deal. Let's just slam it in the microwave. Brexit, if he can continue that all the way through from the beginning to the end of the campaign, he wins. And they knew that.
He
So
has to remain consistent, though. The second that he cucks and stops remaining consistent, he'll have another May moment.
yeah, and it was the question of how do we drag him away from that? How do we talk about anything other than Brexit? And I'm convinced that was their strategy right from the beginning. We must talk about something else. The best way to get him away from Brexit is to talk about the NHS. If we can't do that, then we'll talk about whatever else, but not Brexit. So Jeremy Corbyn was always trying to steer the conversation away from Brexit, and Boris Johnson was always trying to steer it towards it. And in that regard, I must say that it varied from day to day. In one day, one of them won, and the other day, the other one. But as I would say, particularly in the latter days, Labour have been successful in steering things away in the media and whatever from talking about Brexit. It wasn't, how we were told at the very beginning, this is the Brexit election.
Yeah.
And if you were an alien and you would have just seen, say, the last 5 days or so, would you really have said this is the Brexit election, or would you say this is the NHS election?
Both. But I wouldn't. I would say that Labour is definitely not fighting on a Brexit front. The Liberal Democrats
they've been fairly successful in manoeuvring things away from Brexit, but I think in that regard that works in the day-to-day narrative. But as such, it's not as if people are going to forget about Brexit because of it.
Aside from the Conservatives' obvious push towards the Brexit narrative, I would say that because Labour has been so disengaged with it, the two other parties who have Brexit as their primary focus, which would be the Brexit Party and the Liberal Democrats, being cut from the conversation because their polling is so low, I think will make a big difference. I'm curious. I think the Liberal Democrats are going to suffer more of a fall from grace than even is expected in general at the moment. One of the interesting things that keeps coming up again and again with the Liberal Democrats' advertising material is they keep publishing unmarked graphs of what things would look like in an area were the Liberal Democrats to win it or something, which were all considered to be terribly misleading, because it was based on something like, if you had to vote between X, Y, and Z, but you only had the options of X, Y, and Z, and it was really dodgy polling. And I think that they've harmed themselves there, alongside obviously taking a hard Remain stance, which I do not think is resonating well with anyone.
Well, I think the hard Remain stance at first worked.
Well, it did, but if you
read too much into it.
If you look at the voting intention, where they spike up and they go up and they hit 22%, and then they go straight back down
to 13.
To 13. Yeah.
You look at that and you go, there were several big mistakes made. The first one, I think that the one above all else is Joe Swinson's Liberal Democrats.
Yeah.
Somehow they convinced themselves that because she's a woman, this was a plus because the others are just two white men,
I don't think they've actually traded too much on her.
Oh, I think they have. I mean, if you've got a campaign bus with Joe Swinson's Liberal Democrats written on the side of it, not Labour, not Conservative. I mean, Joe Swinson's Liberal Democrats.
I feel like they're just taking
a big photograph of her. I think you're making a big mistake.
Well, I feel like they're trying to play by the same book as Tony Blair's New Labour. But also, I feel like they dramatically overestimated the extent to which they could get 48% of the population behind them.
Well, I mean, they were never, I don't think they were ever expecting to to get all the 48%, if you know what I mean. But
No, but
I think they thought they could capitalize on that large pool of votes.
But they knew that Labour were struggling with their own internal crises. They knew that the Tories were split over Brexit. So they said, right, well, we'll take this stance. We'll hoover up those votes. What actually ended up happening, of course, is that the Tories are party before person anyway, and were never really going to defect to the Liberal Democrats, especially even if they are known as they were known as yellow Tories beforehand, especially with some of their newer policies. And the Labour lot look at the Liberal Democrats and do call them yellow Tories, and so they're never going to switch sides to them. I mean, really.
Well, I mean, there must have been some people. There must have been a considerable amount of people, because there were several polls that showed a willingness to vote Liberal Democrat, and that was hovering around 20%, or, as you said, as high as 22%. So as such, there was reason for the Lib Dems to think, you know what, we could capitalize on that. Let's have a general election in order to get these seats in the bag. And they have just failed abysmally. They have not been able to get any traction in the campaign at all. And I think, my personal belief is they have overestimated the impact of Jo Swinson,
Herself,
the candidate.
I think
massively.
She was also not. She didn't play the media well. So when I mean that behind closed doors, I'm not talking about interviews, because she's had very few interviews. And of course, when Channel 4 refused to platform her for the first leadership debate, and she tried to take that to the Supreme Court, who said,
Yes,
you're not a candidate for Prime Minister, so that's not a problem. I think she soured herself anyway with most of the traditional media in that regard, and I think one of the main reasons as well that you just see the polling fall for the Liberal Democrats is, well, she's had no opportunity to speak. We haven't really heard anything from her apart from the occasional.
No. I mean, the Lib Dems have always been hamstrung by that. If you're the third party, you always struggle with that, because
but you could.
The media will always seek to have, the two main parties to interview. But everybody had heard of Paddy Ashdown, so it is possible. With the right leader, you can become a household name, and you can get yourself to the fore. I mean, Nick Clegg, again, he did manage it, and in fact, he was even, he even ended up on the debates because they had sufficient, sufficient polling, if you know what I mean. They looked like a serious party, and the other two had waned a bit. But with Jo Swinson, had she capitalized from the position of 22%, had she gone upwards, had she touched 25% or more, I could well imagine that, that would have been seen in a different light by the media.
Yeah.
But if from that moment onwards your trajectory is just starkly downwards, what do you expect?
Yeah. Well, once she started her fall from grace, how we call it.
I mean, let's put it like this. Nigel Farage was also giving considerably more interviews after he had won the European election, after his party came out with having received most votes in the European elections. He was being offered interviews left, right, and centre. How many interviews is he being offered now?
He's had one. Yeah.
Do you understand what I mean? So as your prominence wanes in this race, obviously people pay less and less attention to you. So in a way, it's a matter of capitalize on what you've got. And with Swinson, there's just, it was a calamity.
So I understand you're voting Labour then, Britisher?
Oh yes, totally. Put it like this. I am still torn whether to vote Tory or whether to spoil my ballot paper.
Likewise, I sit in one of the safest Labour strongholds in London, so it's a tricky one for me.
So you will be spoiling your ballot paper in Hebrew, will you?
Oh, in Hebrew? Imagine. Since Gowan, referencing your 60-seat prediction, Britisher, says, with enough data, the odds are 1 in 1 Britisher.
Well, there you go.
And Mr. Gently Benevolent, just harking back there, says, John, I look like a right plonker Ashworth.
Yes. Yeah, that would be banter.
Yes.
But yeah, when it comes to it, I don't think that the leap up to 60 seats is necessarily as large as some people think it would be. I really think it's possible because I think there are certain areas in which Labour look tremendously shaky. And I don't think there is anywhere near the numbers of that where the Tories will be punished for their pro-Brexit stance by Remainers.
I can see Colin P. Smith saying, I'm actually more interested in how Labour and Lib Dem majorities go up or down where they do win. And I do think it is something to keep track of. I mean, according to the polls, and not the Britisher poll, we have, very marginal seat losses and gains, whereas the percentage for the Tories would go up substantially from May's government.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things where,
well, put it like this: if any, I mean, the Tories are not expected to make any gains in Scotland. It's as simple as that. If anything, they're expected to lose some seats in Scotland to the SNP. But right now, they're only 8 seats away from a majority. So okay, if they win 8 seats somewhere, they're already drawing even. Beyond that, are we really sort of in doubt that they can get 15, 20 seats off Labour somewhere, given that there are plenty of marginal constituencies and that we have the Brexit upswelling? So I don't think it's that outrageous what I'm claiming.
I just
Always also consider that under Theresa May, when she was really riding the high waves because Corbyn was so terribly unpopular at the last election, there were predictions by, serious polling companies suggesting she could get a majority of as high as 100, and that would be a landslide. Now, I'm not predicting a landslide, but I'm predicting what I would call reasonable to comfortable majority, and 60 seats I call a comfortable majority. But it's not you're not in landslide territory. You're not in Margaret Thatcher or Tony Blair territory.
What's the 8 seats off a majority at the moment? How many do they have? General, it's 300, not 300.
Is it something like 326 they need, and that's the line, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a sort of convoluted mathematics because at one moment you've got so many people in the House of Commons, but then you've also not got the Sinn Féin seats being taken, so you can ignore them altogether, and so on.
Yeah. It's hard to tell. I've seen a massive ramping up of rhetoric from both sides. I've seen Labour, previous friends and colleagues who are voting Labour, spamming, obviously lots of NHS and economy related stuff. I've seen lots of sort of conservative colleagues and veterans and whatnot who are spamming out the biggest post that I see copy pasted everywhere at the moment is reasons not to vote for Boris, and it's like he's a bit of a posh toff and like some marginal things, and then reasons not to vote Jeremy Corbyn, and then an enormous list of all his IRA support and all sorts and anti-Jewish sentiment. I really don't think we can tell at this point the level to which the anti-Semitism claims have any real weight with the general public. I think they're making lots of waves in the media. I think they're making lots of waves among pundits, but I don't think
it's that big a issue with the public, because I think the public, by and large, is a bit doubtful whether this is really true or whether this is just being bigged up, if you know what I mean.
So, but also, there's no there's hardly any, I should say, concrete examples. So
Yes.
it's not
Yes.
that we can point at these people and these people are the problem and these comments are the problem and this person said this and it was on national television. No, it's all backroom stuff. It's all, this was in a private WhatsApp group somewhere.
And this councillor said something inappropriate on Facebook and was thrown out of the party.
And I think already in a society which is a bit polarized at the moment against accusations of, and stuff being dragged out of the mud from 25 years ago and that sort of thing. They're skeptical, and rightly skeptical.
Because I agree with you on that. I think the whole anti-Semitism thing it's playing in the media, but I'm not really sure to what extent. In the same way that the counter argument from the Labour Party, but what about Islamophobia? I think that's also just bouncing off.
Yeah,
I don't think the public are taking much notice.
And the standard response from both party leaders has been, we have ejected or suspended the members who have made anti-Semitic Islamophobic comments. It's like, yeah, okay, you did your job, but it's like they haven't been able to weaponize it against each other, really. I'd say the most high-profile thing I've noticed has been probably Rachel Riley making her quite inflammatory comments, and the T-shirt that she wore of Corbyn with a poster saying that he hated Jews or something along that line.
I had something on the week that was that I found a bit astonishing, but not so much from the, it was, there was this rabbi who effectively had a poster put up about him.
Right.
Because he had criticized Diane Abbott. Now, he then said that he actually felt threatened by it, but you have to understand the poster was in Hebrew. So, unless you're fluent in Hebrew, it's rather difficult to know where one is going here. But apparently there were some words used. I believe there was the word rodef used, which is some sort of Hebrew word for a threat, again, that is so severe that you're entitled to use violence and self-defense against it.
Right.
And he was described as a rodef in that poster. And what was so remarkable about this was that, okay, so Diane Abbott had said, oh, well, the Jews in my constituency, they don't see any problem regarding the Labour Party in the way that these various Jewish organizations claim to, so I've not heard anything. And that's when this rabbi from her constituency spoke out and said, you don't know what you're talking about. We are indeed concerned about what we're hearing. Lo and behold, this poster crops up. And it wasn't so much, one is, what one is saying about him or this, that, whatever. Just imagine, you are a person, okay, you're a rabbi in this case, so I guess you've got some prominence, but you speak out about something Diane Abbott says. The next thing you know, in the part of town in which you live, posters start cropping up calling you names. That I found remarkable. Yeah. And do you understand what I mean? That it's not. We all know that things can get a bit overheated during elections and things like that.
Or just a tad.
But that is remarkable, that somebody says something that the Labour Party, who have got a massive majority in that part, in that part of the world, she is in absolutely no danger of losing her seat. But somebody criticised her queen. How dare they? And then you start, gluing up posters on lampposts and whatever, that this person is who knows what, because he dared say something. And to me, yes, that was quite serious insofar as you're attacking an individual simply for having the gall to utter an opinion.
Yeah.
And yeah, I found that a bit startling, to be honest.
People in the chat are saying, anyone have this depression feeling the election is going to be a rerun of 2017?
I mean, I think we all have that worry at the back of our minds, but as I say, I believe this is going to be a comfortable Tory victory.
I have a foreboding sense that there is going to be an upset one way or the other. You know what I mean? So, right. So either.
So there's going to be a sensational win for Corbyn or for Boris Johnson.
Right. So we're either. Well, I don't think that any of my predictions would have a win for Corbyn. Right. But I do see the potential that something has gone over with the public that has been missed, or that things have riled them up so much that we end up with a hung parliament, which obviously would be a repeat.
That's another option, isn't it? You've either got a Tory victory or you've got a hung parliament. It's really that simple. Because nobody else really can muster a majority the way things go now.
And I mean, you talk about your friend who said that he was a Labour supporter and he'd always been one, and he was changing his vote. But my brother has always been a Conservative voter, and he has always voted Conservative, and he is considering voting Labour this time round. Interesting.
Is he a Remainer?
No, he wasn't.
So what is his reasoning then?
He doesn't like anything which is going on in his mind with the NHS. He thinks both parties are going to screw the country over, but he feels like Boris Johnson's Brexit plan, because it's not, it would leave us worse off, he thinks, than if we were simply to remain at this point, unless.
So he says he NHS, wants, or is it a Remain argument, or is it a bit of both?
It's a both, because he wants Brexit done properly or not at all. And he doesn't want the NHS to be, in his words, up for sale to the US. So, and he would rather not take the risk in his mind. And I said, but £80 billion a year fiscal deficit on top of that, with that sort of thing. And I think that the real stealth of this are, you've got these two big things: the NHS, which Labour is trying to push for with its policy, and the Brexit stuff from the Conservatives. But I think it's all the other stuff on top. I think a lot of the carbon neutral stuff and the insanity of the time scale by which they want to achieve, like both parties. I mean, 2050 is not, is quite short notice. The Conservatives want to bring that down to 2040, and the Labour Party wants to institute its £400 billion over 10 years climate office, so that we can be carbon neutral by force, if necessary, by 2030. So,
yes.
And I think issues like that have really, really gone under the radar, alongside things like the Labour Party wanting to... no, it wasn't the Labour Party, that was a Liberal Democrat policy, sorry, my bad. I was thinking of the self-ID trans rights thing.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But the Labour Party wanting to reform education in the way that it wants to reform it, the abolition of grammar schools and that sort of thing. And I also think like the ways in which Labour and the Conservatives want to deal with the housing crisis, which has been very low key in terms of discussion points online. I think both of those are flawed as well. The Tories not quite so much as Labour's give everyone a council house idea. So it's like, I feel that these issues which are embedded, I wonder to what extent they have had an effect outside of the kind of empty rhetoric of the debates. Do you know what I mean?
Well, I get the impression that quite a few people realise, how shall we say? They just had. I saw a video with Starkey just this afternoon, in which he was actually talking on how, on the Brexit question, the two sides tend to talk past each other, because one side is talking about values such as sovereignty, patriotism, and so on, and the other side is talking about money. They're talking about what one might lose in trade and whatever, and how they're not addressing each other's points. They're not even hearing each other's points. They're kind of ships passing in the night, if you know what I mean.
Oh, no debate has taken place this year.
But what is interesting is, of course, that the Remainer argument in that regard is very largely economic regarding Brexit. But, of course, the considerations against Jeremy Corbyn are also highly economic in nature. So the very sorts of people who would be, putting forward a Remainer argument are also the people who will look at Jeremy Corbyn and go, oh, good God, he wants to spend how much? So, to my mind, the potential damage that people would foresee Brexit bringing about, even as ardent Remainers, is more than likely dwarfed by the potential economic damage that those very same people see Jeremy Corbyn bringing about if he were to have a go at government. And we know that he doesn't necessarily need to win the election in order to get a go at government. He merely needs to be the sort of lead figure of a progressive coalition.
I mean, you say that, but I think you underestimate as well the degree to which people are economically illiterate. I've seen an awful lot of people sharing the graph of the fiscal deficit and the overall debt, and its increase, and then claiming that because it's leveled off now, relatively speaking, in terms of what we're borrowing and what we are doing. They claim we're no longer in a recession, etc. And no longer in austerity. And then they go, like the debt has climbed to 1.8 trillion under the Tories. Therefore, they're clearly incapable of managing the economy. We should give it to the socialists. It's like, oh my goodness, like what are you talking about? Like it's taken them.
Yes, what extent are those actually just entirely disingenuous arguments?
I mean, I see it from a lot of people.
Is that really illiteracy, or is that just completely disingenuous?
I think it is illiteracy. To be perfectly honest, these are coming from people who I do not trust them with graphs or an Excel spreadsheet. Let me just put it that way, right? And I think that is a lot of the voter base. Corbyn.
So, as such, are we therefore? Could we summarize it as such that I actually believe there will be a comfortable victory, whereas you are actually feeling quite anxious at the moment?
I am quite anxious. As I say, I don't know which way it will go. I see like the possibility of hung parliament. I see Conservative majority. I think conservatively, I would say that I think Boris is going to edge it. I don't think we're looking at a 60-seat majority. And I don't mean to scoff at that.
No.
But it is. For me, I think it's probably going to be closer to a 10 to 15 seat majority.
Okay, yeah. But you would also see the possibility of a hung parliament.
Yeah, if there was a major upset tomorrow, but that's simply because I don't trust pollsters.
So would you see that as a major upset, so an unlikely event, or would you see that within the range of the possible, sort of from hung to 15 seats? Is that sort of your scope?
Yeah, kind of. I think I see. The thing I'm always trying to take into account with these pollsters as well is the number of people who've answered "I'm not sure" and "I don't know yet."
Mm-hmm.
And so you can generally, if you're seeing that in a safe seat, you can kind of discount that value. But when it comes to the more marginal seats, where you're going, it's not 10% of people, it's closer to 20 who haven't really had a word. I think we could see some big changes there that we're not expecting, or that no one's expecting, just because they'll make their decision on the day in the box.
Yeah.
Speaking of predictions, however, the Nvidia's donated £5. Thank you ever so much, and says, I predict Conservatives 42% and Labour with 38%, with a Conservative majority of 30 to 40 seats. Hold me to that, NSO, come election night. Thank you very much.
I mean, I'm just looking at the figures here. Wikipedia is very good for this, figures of past elections. So if you if you take away the Theresa May catastrophe, if you know what I mean, and you look at the last one prior to that was David Cameron against Ed Miliband. And that ended with the Tories on 330 seats. So, to my mind, it's just a given that they go back to that anyway, because they no longer have got the Theresa May factor.
I mean, Labour don't have the Ed Miliband factor dragging them down this time.
Yes, they've just got the Jeremy Corbyn factor dragging them down even further.
Jeremy Corbyn is both a drag and a bit like he's very divisive. He has people who venerate him and people who despise him. Yes, it's just a question of how much people do on either side of that.
The polls I have seen, I know again you will say one has to be careful. Polls.
Oh yeah, that's a given. But go on.
The polls given the individual leaders as opposed to the parties, they are so decisive that they seem to be kind of beyond doubt. That Boris Johnson seems to be hovering around 40%, both approval and disapproval.
Yeah.
Jeremy Corbyn seems to be in the 20s for approval and in the 60% for disapproval.
Yes, we mustn't forget that he is the most disliked Labour leader of all time. For 70.
So if Cameron was able to do 330 seats against Ed Miliband, it should be taken, to my mind, as a given that Boris Johnson will get back to the pre-Theresa May stage. He will get back to there almost automatically. The question beyond that is, how big a factor is the Boris factor in gaining votes? And how big a factor is the drag factor of Jeremy Corbyn in losing votes for Labour? Then on top of that, you then put in Brexit. And, I mean, some of the absolute balmy policies. Now, you will, as you have pointed out, some of the balmy policies you believe just through sheer economic illiteracy will actually gain Labour some votes. But at the same time, some of those balmy policies will also lose Labour some votes.
It's interesting to observe Labour's strategy when it comes to the people their platform. Both parties, in fact, have lent heavily on leader-only interactions. So, like, you'll notice Labour has not really... we haven't really seen any of the big members of either party, making big statements on television or radio.
Yes.
And so it really does come down to...
Yes.
It's definitely a two-horse race, and it's based off those two people. Because you haven't seen things like... I feel like if Diane Abbott, for instance, had been given more screen time...
That's exactly why they didn't give it.
Which is exactly why they didn't give it to her.
One is reminded of...
but people forget...
what was he called? John Prescott.
Yeah.
John Prescott famously, during the Tony Blair elections, was given a bus and told to tour the north of England. And that was to get him away
from the media. Yeah.
So he could go and press the flesh in northern towns, and he would make a few local newspapers, but he would be out of the national media. He would be away from the Westminster bubble and whatever, because they knew otherwise he would just make a hash of it. I think it was Rubber who pointed out yesterday that Labour just don't have anybody. And I think there is an element of that. So the Tories have by choice concentrated on Boris Johnson because they see him as the one who can win stuff. Largely due to what he did in London.
But you look at who are the next two most recognisable household names for the Tories. There'd be Michael Gove, possibly Jeremy Hunt, who are both despised by the public.
Yes, but you've also got Sajid Javid as a Home Sec. He's not Home Secretary; he's Chancellor, isn't he?
He's Chancellor.
He was Home Secretary.
Yeah.
They have got some people who are at least capable of holding their own. Whereas when you look at Labour, whom could you put in front of a camera who would not be a complete liability of the Labour front bench? I mean, did you see the performance of Angela Rayner on yesterday's sort of question time special?
No, do tell.
Oh, calamitous.
Oh, I need to watch that then. Definitely.
She couldn't stop interrupting everybody.
But what about the magical?
She really came. So she really sort of went head to head with Nigel Farage, and I think at some point Nigel Farage just basically stopped talking. He just went, "There's just no point. Whatever I try and say, this woman will just try and shout at me."
But what about the magic of John Ashworth even?
Oh well, I mean, how can we say? I mean, every party needs a sire.
People are mentioning in chat Mog and Raab for the Conservatives, but you have to remember that Raab, with his comments about anti-feminism, is not exactly the media's darling. It's very easy to spin what he says into a net negative nationally, and Mog, I think, has been keeping quiet and out of it in general. I think I think Mog
is more than likely aware of the fact that his brand doesn't really go down well with the population at large. So Boris Johnson got what exactly? Mog is posh, but Boris Johnson has a certain charm that Mog just doesn't possess. So his poshness counts against him much more than that of Boris does.
Do you remember as well, Mog got exactly what he wanted out of May's government, which is he became Speaker of the House? Not Speaker of the House.
Leader of the House.
Leader of the House, sorry.
Nobody got that from Boris.
Yeah, he got that from Boris, but he played his cards through May's government, and then he backed Boris at the right time, and now he got that. And he's always stated, and I think he's been absolutely honest when he says this, that he doesn't want either a cabinet position or to be prime minister. And in fact, the only interview I've seen of him in the run-up to this election has said, I'm not that bothered about being, one of the Tory top candidates, and he was never platformed after that again. So I think
we'll see. I mean, I can very well see him as sort of, I don't know,
people saying
Secretary of State for Cornish pasties or something like that.
Laconic saying Mog effed up over Grenfell. Oh yes, because he said something along the lines of, if they had been more intelligent, they would have just left the building or something. But and I know that that's out of context. Yeah. I know that's fully out of context.
I feel he was a bit hard done by there.
Yeah.
Yes, he was kind of straying into territory, but he did not say what was effectively, the words that were put in his mouth weren't really what he had said. So yes, I think.
Yeah, but it's enough
a bit of grass has grown over that one. I think he will politically survive that one with ease, simply because he didn't actually say what was alleged.
He may come back. I do think that Mog has a charm of his own, but I don't think that it can be leveraged to swing voters, if that makes sense.
He's never going to be mainstream.
So there's that. And as also they could shaft him over, because if they're pushing Brexit as the big thing, they would do the personal attack on Mog because his main office is in Ireland. And so it'd be very easy.
That's before you even get to Catholicism and abortion.
Yeah. What were we talking about? Yeah, like the main people. Actually, we haven't heard anything from Dominic Raab, really, since his, he was knocked out the leadership election as a surprise.
Well, I think it's just simply, they basically agree their election strategy. And I think in this case, the election strategy on either side is we sell the leader.
Yeah.
And everybody else just stand aside.
And in Labour's case, because they only have the leader to attack,
precisely,
they are going after sort of the Trump-Boris connection. Boris, who can only attack Jeremy Corbyn, is going after his weak position on Brexit, obviously. But obviously, the supporter base are leaning into the Corbyn's past associations, wreath layings and whatnot. Well,
yes, his friends in Hamas.
Oh, his friends in Hamas and Hezbollah. I actually I feel like I think I understand. Of all things, I understand what Corbyn's position is. I think he's utterly wrong, but I feel like he's trying to, he's got people in the room there, and he's trying to facilitate a discussion. So I can understand that. I feel like the fact that you are negotiating with terrorists, which I would disagree with in many cases, is utterly wrong. But I have some sympathy for that particular comment. Everything else, laying wreaths at the graves of terrorists, and holding minutes of silence for IRA bombers and stuff like that, I find utterly abhorrent. But that one comment, I feel like, is haunting him from a context where he chose the wrong words for that situation, and I think that saying friends was far too congenial. But I can understand the sentiment and the thought behind it about bringing people to the table, and I can understand where Labour supporters are coming from when they say that sort of thing, even if I don't agree with the statement itself, and I don't think that it outweighs all the other crap that he's done.
I'm just looking at the figure here. With 330 seats that Cameron won, he had a majority of 12. So a small majority, I think, is what you could call it.
Do we think Boris is going to do better than Cameron then?
If we were to get back, just if we basically were simply to have the result that annuls the Theresa May catastrophe, then you would effectively get back to this. So you would have a majority of 12 seats. But this because the result that we had last time around is, yes, it's Corbyn, but it's also the Maybot, and it is pro-fox hunting, take the houses of the pensioners who need social care, abolish any school lunches. I mean, she basically took a swipe at every single demographic you possibly could with that manifesto that she single-handedly concocted with her two advisors.
It seemed like every word that came out of her mouth was suddenly another nail in her coffin, really, didn't
precisely.
it?
And yet she still ended up with a small lack, if you know what I mean. Basically, the DUP could still make it up. So I don't know what her sort of negative majority was, but I think it was less than 10. So as such, even with someone as calamitous as Theresa May, you really weren't that far away from the zero figure. And if you basically just simply recreate what Cameron did against Ed Bacon Sarnie Miliband, you would get to a majority of 12. Now, if you have a majority of 12 and say you take 25 seats more of the opposition than you actually lose, then you get to that 60-seat territory.
We'll have to see, won't we?
So I do not think that it's quite as outlandish as some people make it out to be, what I'm claiming here.
We will have to see. Liberal Zardos donated £2. Thank you ever so much. Says, at least Subri will get a house on her head. I haven't heard anything much about Subri.
I also don't get the comment of house on her head.
Feel free to clarify, Liberal Zardos. No need to send another super chat. Just drop a message in the chat anyway. And Dread to Think donated £2. Thank you ever so much. It says, shy Tory element going on in traditional Labour seats? ?
Well, I think that you can basically add another % or 2 to the Tory vote at the moment they're standing in the voting booth.
Yeah, I think things are leaning more towards the Tories. Actually, I'll bring up what my brother said. I'm curious what he said. So he said,
you have a brother? There are more of you?
There are more of me, yes. So he said to me, so who are you voting for? I'm voting for the Conservatives in my safe Labour seat, or I'm going to support my ballot. He said, what's your reasoning? I said, I reviewed the manifestos. They're the only rational choice. You decided, yeah, I've read Labour and Conservative. Whilst I'm not a big fan of Labour's, I don't trust the Conservatives at all. So I said, I said the Tories not necessarily a great option, but I truly want Labour to implode and burn in hell at this. He says, if you consider the Tories' Brexit plan and the NHS, it's due to cost us more than it's worth in the long run, regardless of how many times Boris says we don't want to sell it. I promise. I don't mind paying a minimal amount more in that. It sounds like Labour are after on tax. I'm curious as to whether their costing predictions are actually feasible. However, I'm well aware how catastrophic it would be if they didn't get it right. Personally, I don't want either of the main two to win. I reckon Hung has the most potential for good outcome. So I've agreed with my girlfriend at the moment that if anything gets through that isn't beneficial to us or the country Brexit-wise, we'll be making several applications for leaving the country. I hate the idea of Labour. I hate their leader, and believe that no matter the general belief, the party will reflect that leader. And that I'm not a fan of at all. I believe the Tories are going to destroy our economy in the same way Labour would. However, no other party currently has the support, ability, or correct run of policies to do good by everybody.
So he has effectively decided for himself that a hung parliament is actually the ideal choice because they all cancel each other out.
Yeah.
Okay.
In a sense of,
was he a pro-Brexit, or was he a Remain, or was he an undecided figure in that regard?
He was pro-Brexit. So he voted. Well, he would have voted leave, but he couldn't be bothered to go down to the station on that particular day.
Okay, so I mean, he would have voted leave, but he's not really ardently so.
No,
that's more than likely reflected in his then wanting a hung parliament, because surely if he were ardently pro-Brexit, the one thing he would want is not to have another hung parliament that would once again frustrate Brexit.
He's not particularly politically engaged. So it's one of those things where he's thinking about it from the perspective of why can't they all just get along? Why can't they negotiate? Why can't they kind of come together and try
if your brother is not particularly politically engaged,
yeah,
are you, with your political interests, the black sheep of the family?
Not particularly. My dad used to be. I mean, he's had his stroke now, so he's less. And my mother is not politically engaged. My sister is not at all, and definitely asks me how to vote every time it comes along. But
there you go. So you'll be able to instruct your sister how to vote.
Jury rigging saying British are going senile. He already asked your brother's Brexit position half an hour ago. I can only agree. You did.
Oh dear God.
Well, this is what you get. You shouldn't drink on the job, British.
Well, there is that. It's basically an infusion of too much tea. What can I say?
Twinings, you have gone to.
More than likely, also the effect of trying to read about Tory majorities while having a conversation at the same time.
Indeed, yeah. Twinings, you've gone too far. Anyway. Hashtag end Twinings. No, so it's one of those things where he, I feel like when I look at him, I see him representing an awful lot of voters in his particular sphere, which is sort of middle income voters, and the non-politically engaged. And it is true that most people, you have a split between people who are terribly entertained by the goings on in the Commons, and the people who are very frustrated that the two, they can't actually have a proper conversation, because they speak two different languages.
If anything, they're kind of turned off by what they see.
Yeah.
And
it's like, I can understand it. I certainly came from that position when I was first starting out. I'm going, why can't you just down and actually agree these things? And you realise how polarised and controversial these things are, and that politics doesn't reflect reality in any way, shape or form, really. So it's tricky. Mergoot saying, man alive, Delingpole and Toby Young are pessimistic. Check DM. I will check. I presume you sent this to me on Twitter. Have a look, see. Message. My escape plan if Corbyn wins. Interesting, by Toby Young. With less than 24 hours to go before polling day, my bum is beginning to squeak. The final YouGov MRP poll predicts the Conservatives will win a majority of 28, but a hung parliament is well within the margin of error. This means we could be waking up on Friday to find Jeremy Corbyn heading to Downing Street as leader of a minority government propped up by the SNP and Lib Dems. What then? Well, the exodus will begin, obviously, and I don't just mean Britain's Jews. A recent survey finding that 47% of them would seriously consider emigrating if Corbyn became Prime Minister. Nor do I just mean the super rich, although they would be off too. According to the founder of Phones for You, every wealthy person he knows is planning to leave the country if Corbyn gets in. Given that the 31,000 UK residents who comprise the top 0.1% of income earners are responsible for 12% of income tax, that would be disastrous for Britain's finances. But what about Labour's political enemies? Corbyn's shock troops in Momentum have already demonstrated their willingness to physically assault their opponents, and that was before their glorious leader had seized power. Hard left protesters, styling themselves as anti-fascists, have exhibited no qualms about trying to assault Conservative MPs, including Jacob Rees-Mogg, when they speak at universities. How would these same thugs behave, knowing Diane Abbott would be the Secretary of State for Justice? Diane Abbott would be in charge of Britain's police, and Richard Bergen is the Secretary of State for Justice. Yes, and it goes on, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I would caution. I understand that the super rich would leave. I understand that. I also understand that perhaps some of the rich would leave, but I would caution against. I mean, to be honest, I would have just cautioned outright Toby Young from writing something like that, because there is the danger of sounding a bit too much like those people who promised, and I insist, they promised to leave the United States of America if Trump won and go and live in Canada, and none of them have done so.
Well, I would suggest that, again, the people who are claiming to do that, aside from the fact that they're celebrities and they are dependent on this for work, right? Their location is dependent for work. I feel like people on the right, especially the wealthy right, are also more likely to follow through on that kind of promise when compared to perhaps leftists.
I'll say I can see super rich and whatever, but for example, I can't see Toby Young doing it.
Fair enough. He's talking about his survival plan. Let me see. He is basically he was going to stockpile some food, read a lot, and pretend to be a reformed character. Yeah, that's about it. And he claims Owen Jones will become the newly appointed prison czar on a salary of 350k. That's that side of things.
I could well imagine that there might be a role for Owen Jones. Prison czar would be the sort of thing. I could imagine him being somebody put in charge of an inquiry into discrimination of some sorts, if you know what I mean. I could see him being very much at home in such an environment.
The James Delling poll has also said, in less than 36 hours from now, Britain will either be in the hands of an amiable, japesome, patriotic, blonde, pretend buffoon conservative, or an unreconstructed anti-Semitic terrorist supporting Marxists leading a gang of viciously intolerant hard-left boot boys. This makes this Britain's...
So he's very much hedging his bets there, isn't he?
Flight 93 election. Unless Conservatives can storm the cockpit, grab hold of the controls from the leftist suicide merchants, then the whole country will crash and burn. I have to admit, I do not think that it is a possibility that Labour will win. But the concept of a Labour win is terrifying.
What I find worrying is just how much support there nonetheless is.
Yeah.
Given how outlandish it is, and I don't see them winning in any way, shape, or form. But just the fact that there still are, around 30% of the electorate who are willing to tick the box. That I find remarkable. Just given how outlandish they are.
Yeah. Let me see. Like, what's your plan? Let's say the worst case scenario happens, Britisher, and Labour gets a majority government somehow through some kind of blind miracle of some god somewhere. What do you do?
Well, I mean, just carry on regardless. What can you do?
Carry on. The British will be arrested within the week. I've put serious consideration into keeping my head down and then leaving the country after my degree concludes. But it would depend, because I would obviously benefit from the initial short-term shock, and I reckon that would go pretty well for about a year, and then I would need to get the hell out, because there's no way that this is going to go well, and I think it would make the 2009 financial crash look like a little party. Right. I'd probably go to Poland, to be fair. Quite like Poland.
How good is your Polish?
Passable, but not great.
So you actually do speak Polish?
A little. Very little. But I'm learning at the moment. And I have a friend who is Polish who's helping me with that sort of thing. She's my dusz radości. So that's...
I will take your word for it.
Please
just do not ask me to repeat that.
It's just... there we go. Anything else to add on the election, Britisher? Because I think we should.
I think we've pretty much beaten that one to death, to be honest.
Definitely. Will you be joining me tomorrow evening at any point for the election stream?
Well, we will see what transpires. I could well imagine it might happen.
Fair enough. Right. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. I appreciate it. It's a bit of a droll and a drab stream this evening, but I think it was an important discussion to have. I'm sorry that I didn't have more guests on, but tomorrow I'm hoping to have a more varied panel besides myself and Britisher, who I know you all know and love, but sometimes it's nice to get a few different voices on here. So I'm hoping to have some varied people on, and yes, something to look forward to. Until then, best of luck to all of you, and have a good week. Take care, and good night.
Toodle pip.